$14. That was all Lorraine Beaumont had left in her checking account the morning she walked into a municipal tax sale and accidentally became the owner of an abandoned hotel. She hadn't planned to bid on anything. She wasn't even supposed to be there. But that was the thing about grief. It had a way of steering you somewhere you never expected and leaving you changed in ways you couldn't have planned for. Lorraine was 62 years old, a former school secretary from Sudbury, Ontario, who had spent 34 years clipping grocery flyers, carrying a reusable bag before it was fashionable, and never once spending money she didn't have. She had been sensible her entire adult life. Sensible right up until the moment the cardiologist at Health Sciences North sat her down and told her that her husband, Frank, had suffered a massive myocardial infarction and that his heart, the same stubborn, generous heart she had loved for 31 years, was simply not able to carry on. Frank Beaumont had been gone for 5 months and 2 weeks when Lorraine found herself sitting in a folding chair inside the Sudbury Community Centre, a paper coffee cup going cold in her hands. She was there because her old colleague, a woman named Sheila Nowak, who worked in the municipal clerk's office, had mentioned there might be a clerical position opening up with the city. The position, Lorraine discovered the moment she arrived, had been filled internally 3 days prior. Too hollowed out to walk back through the January cold to where her car was parked 6 blocks away. She stayed. She sat in the back of the room and watched the tax sale proceed with the detached numbness of someone who had already lost the thing they cared most about. The auctioneer was a lanky, methodical man named Doug Fenton, who called out each forfeited property with the enthusiasm of someone reading a hydro bill aloud. Most of the lots were vacant parcels of Rockenbush Shield country that the county had seized for decades of unpaid taxes. Nobody wanted them. The bids, when they came at all, were low and half-hearted. "Moving along," Doug said, adjusting his glasses. "Lot 31. The Lakeview Arms Hotel, situated on 11 acres off Shore Road in Espanola. Commercial structure, approximately 18,000 square feet, 4 stories, waterfront access to Lake Panache. County has registered environmental and structural liens. Minimum bid to clear the administrative arrears is $220. Do I have $220? A low murmur moved through the sparse crowd of developers, speculators, and municipal observers. Lorraine recognized the Lakeview Arms by name alone. Everyone in the region did. It had been a landmark once, a destination resort built in the early 1960s by a Toronto restaurateur named Neil Mercer, who had styled it after the old fishing lodges of Muskoka and made it fashionable for a decade. But Neil had died suddenly in 1994, and his estate had dissolved into a bitter legal dispute between creditors and family. The hotel had sat shuttered ever since. 32 years of hard Canadian winters taking the roof apart one freeze-thaw cycle at a time. The county had attempted to demolish it twice. Asbestos in the original insulation had stopped them both. $220, Doug repeated. Folks, the copper plumbing in a building that size is worth twice the opening bid alone. Somebody's getting a deal here. Silence. Lorraine looked down at her coffee cup. Inside her coat pocket was her wallet. Inside the wallet was a single folded check she had written to herself from her line of credit, $250 for the grocery run she needed to do on the way home. It was not money she had. It was money she was borrowing against a line of credit she was already dangerously close to maxing out. Frank's voice came to her then, unprompted and precise, the way it always did now, arriving without warning like a smell that recalled a whole summer. Rainy, the worst thing that can happen is nothing. He used to say that. He'd said it the morning he proposed to her in the parking lot of a Wendy's in Chelmsford because he'd lost the dinner reservation, and she'd laughed so hard she'd nearly cried. He'd said it when they'd adopted their dog, when they'd bought the house, when he'd decided at 54 to take up woodworking. The worst thing that can happen is nothing. Lorraine's hand went up. The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something unexpected happens. Doug Fenton blinked and pointed his gavel at her. "I have a bid, $220 from the lady in the back." He paused, scanning the room. "Anyone care to join us? Lot 31, Lakeview Arms Hotel, 220, going once." Another pause, going twice. The gavel fell with a flat wooden sound. "Sold, ma'am. Please see the clerk's desk." A man in a fleece vest sitting in the second row turned to look at her. He had the broad, easy confidence of someone who owned things as a matter of course. He didn't say anything, but the expression on his face was unmistakable. The kind of look people give a stray cat that has wandered onto a highway. Lorraine walked to the front of the room on legs that didn't quite feel like her own. She handed over the check, signed 4 pages of documents she did not fully read, and walked out of the community center into the January air with a receipt interhenged in her hand, confirming that she was now the registered owner of a condemned lakeside hotel she had never set eyes on. She sat in her car for a long time with the heater running and the receipt on the passenger seat. Then she pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. What had she done? The grocery money was gone. She had no way to pay her heating bill. The bank had sent a third letter about the mortgage, a letter she had not opened because she already knew what it said, and she had just spent borrowed money on a building that was, by all accounts, held together by asbestos and nostalgia. But as the defrost cleared the windshield and the grey Sudbury morning came back into focus, something shifted in her. Sheila had once mentioned that a family friend had stripped enough copper pipe from a foreclosed commercial property to cover 2 months of rent. The Lakeview Arms was a 4-story hotel. Even in its stripped-out state, there would be plumbing, there would be fixtures, there would be something. Lorraine put the car in drive. She was going to go and see what she'd bought. Shore Road in January was a single lane of packed snow cutting through black spruce forest. Lorraine followed the county map on her phone, the signal dropping in and out until the tree line broke and she saw it. The Lakeview Arms rose against the white sky like a photograph from a different era. 4 stories of poured concrete and cedar cladding that had once been stained a warm chestnut, now grey and split and covered in the dark stain of 32 winters. The roof line had buckled on the east side. Most of the ground floor windows were plywood. The old sign over the main entrance, the one that had once been backlit in amber, hung at an angle. The letters Lakeview Arms still readable but faded to the color of old bone. Behind it, through the bare birches, Lake Panache was frozen solid, flat and white as a dinner plate. Lorraine pulled on her work gloves, took the crowbar from her trunk, the same crowbar Frank had kept in every car they'd ever owned, a habit from his years as a volunteer with the Chelmsford Fire Department, and found a side door near the old kitchen loading bay that was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The smell hit her first, mildew and mouse, and the particular staleness of a building that had not moved air in years. She clicked on her headlamp and moved through the back corridor toward the main lobby. The lobby was enormous and heartbreaking. The original stone fireplace still dominated the far wall, solid and unchanged, surrounded now by the wreckage of the room that had once gathered around it, overturned wing chairs, collapsed bookshelves, a chandelier that had come down from the ceiling and lay on the warped hardwood like a broken crown. Snow had come in somewhere above and settled in the far corner, softening everything beneath it into white shapes. She spent the better part of 2 hours moving through the building methodically, checking mechanical rooms, prying open panel covers, looking for anything the scrappers had missed. But whoever had stripped the building in the late 90s had been thorough about it. The copper supply lines were gone from every suite she checked. The electrical panels were bare. Even the old brass door hardware had been removed from the frames. By 4 in the afternoon, she had a canvas bag containing perhaps $30 worth of salvageable material and a lower back that was making its grievances very clear. She sat down on the stone hearth of the lobby fireplace to rest. That was when the weather turned. Lake effect snow came off Lake Panache with no warning, the way it always does in January. One moment grey and still, the next a whiteout that reduced visibility to the length of your arm. The wind off the lake hit the building with a sound like freight cars coupling. Lorraine checked her phone. 0 bars. The road she'd come in on would be a skating rink within the hour, and her all-season tires had been due for replacement since October. She was spending the night. She found the hotel manager's office on the ground floor, set back from the main lobby behind a short corridor. The door was solid oak, and the room behind it was, in contrast to everything else she'd seen, almost intact. The original window shutters were closed and latched, which had kept the vandals and the weather out. There was a leather executive chair behind a broad walnut desk, its surface covered in a 1/4 inch of undisturbed dust. A small credenza stood against one wall. Above the credenza hung a large framed photograph, the hotel's opening week in the summer of 1963, a group of men in short-sleeved shirts standing on a dock with fishing rods, squinting into the sun. In the center of the group, arm around the man next to him, was a heavy-set man with thick dark hair and an enormous grin. The plaque at the bottom of the frame read, "Neil Mercer, founder, Lakeview Arms, June 1963. Lorraine dragged the leather chair into the corner farthest from the window, pulled her coat tight, and sat down. She turned off her headlamp to save the battery. She did not expect to sleep, but she did. The sound that woke her was mechanical and close. A low, rhythmic knocking, like something rotating against a worn bearing, then a pause, then 3 distinct clicks. Lorraine was awake immediately, fully awake. In the absolute darkness of the sealed office, the wind was still loud outside, but this sound was inside the room, coming from the wall behind the credenza. She held herself perfectly still, her heart moving at a rate it had not managed since the night the hospital called about Frank. The sound came again, 2 knocks, a pause, 3 clicks, then silence. She turned on her headlamp. The room was empty. The furniture was exactly as she'd left it. She crossed to the credenza and pressed her ear against the wall above it. Nothing. Then she saw what she hadn't noticed before. The dust on the credenza's surface was disturbed in a neat arc, as though the piece of furniture had been swung out from the wall and pushed back. Recently, or at least more recently than the undisturbed layer on everything else suggested. Lorraine gripped the right edge of the credenza and pulled. It swung toward her with surprising ease, mounted on a concealed pivot point. Behind it, the wall was not plaster. It was a panel of dark walnut, and in the center of that panel was a round recessed slot, not a standard keyhole, but a coin lock, small about the diameter of a toonie set into a brass ring. She looked at the framed photograph of Neil Mercer above, where the credenza had been. She lifted it off the wall. Behind the frame, taped to the backing paper inside a small wax paper envelope, was a heavy coin. Not currency. A custom-minted brass disc with the silhouette of the hotel on one side and the words Lakeview Arms. Grand opening, summer 1963 on the other. Lorraine turned it over in her gloved hand. She aligned it with the coin slot and pushed. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then the wall moved. The entire panel withdrew on a hydraulic mechanism, sliding back 6 inches and then rotating sideways to reveal a passage no wider than a doorframe. The air that came out was cold and dry and carried a faint smell she couldn't immediately name, something waxy, slightly chemical like old paint and mineral spirits. Lorraine stepped through. The passage was short, maybe 4 meters, ending at a fire door made of reinforced steel. The door was unlocked, the handle turned easily, and it opened onto a room that had been built into the concrete foundation of the hotel itself. She raised her headlamp. The room was dry and still, maintained by some climate control mechanism that had apparently been running on its own separate circuit for 3 decades. Along the back wall, mounted in built-in wooden frames padded with felt, were paintings. 7 of them. Large canvases, each individually shrouded in a layer of archival paper that had preserved them in the cold, dry air. Beside the paintings on a low wooden table sat a leather portfolio and 3 ring binders with dates handwritten on the spines in a cramped, precise hand. In the center of the room, on a freestanding display mount, rested a single unframed canvas, unhidden, positioned as though placed there for someone to find at their leisure. Even through the harsh light of her headlamp, even across 30 years of waiting, Lorraine recognized it, the thick, deliberate brushwork, the stilted, angular figures rendered against a pale lake background in the particular amber and green palette that had become inseparable from a certain era of Canadian art. She had seen a reproduction of it in a library book years ago, in an article about unsolved cultural crimes. It was the Tom Thompson, not one of the well-known ones, but the one that had disappeared. The Birch Grove, Autumn, the small panel stolen from a private foundation's collection in Ottawa in November of 1989 during a charity gala, whose disappearance had never been publicly resolved. It had been insured for $800,000 at the time of the theft. What it would be worth today was a number Lorraine's mind refused to assemble. She stood absolutely still for a long moment. Then she opened the first ring binder. The handwriting was cramped but precise. What she found was not a hotel registry. It was a transaction ledger, payments made and received, names attached to dollar amounts, dates going back decades, municipal officials. A provincial cabinet minister whose name she recognized because he was still, at 80 years old, occasionally quoted in the Sudbury Star. A federal customs officer. Several amounts marked with a small recurring symbol that appeared next to entries she didn't understand until she found a handwritten key near the back of the second binder. The symbol meant evidence retained. Neil Mercer had not just been a resort owner. He had been, from all appearances, a careful and systematic man who had understood very early that the people most worth doing business with were the ones who had the most to lose. Lorraine closed the binder. She set it back on the table. The footstep behind her was quiet, but in the sealed concrete room it was unmistakable. She turned around. Standing in the doorway of the passage was the man in the fleece vest from the auction, the one who had watched her walk to the clerk's desk with that expression, like a stray cat on a highway. He looked different now. His face was no longer arranged in that casual, proprietary way. It was tight and purposeful, and in his right hand, held low against his thigh, was a compact pistol. "Mrs. Beaumont," he said. His voice was pleasant, which made it worse. "I didn't expect you to find it quite this quickly. You've saved me a considerable amount of time." Lorraine did not move. "You were at the auction." "I've been at every auction for the past 4 years," he said, stepping fully into the room. "The county wouldn't clear the environmental lien until last autumn. I've been waiting. My name is Craig Mercer. Neil was my father." The pieces assembled themselves in her mind without effort. "You knew about this room." "I knew it existed. My father told me near the end. He was not a man who left things unresolved. He just ran out of time to come back for them himself." Craig's eyes moved across the paintings, then to the binders on the table, then to the Thompson panel on its stand. "He built this room in 1981. The hydraulic mechanism, the coin lock. He was an engineer before he was a hotelier. Studied at Ryerson. He liked systems, liked contingencies." He took another step forward. "I knew the coin was somewhere in that office. I searched it 8 times over the past 3 years. I had a false work order that got me access during a county inspection. I took that credenza apart at the joints looking for a hidden compartment. I never thought to look at the back of the photograph. You let me outbid you." Something approximating a smile crossed his face. "For $220, I stayed quiet and put you in that room. A grieving widow buying a condemned hotel for scrap? Nobody looks twice at that. I planned to wait for you to poke around and leave, then come back with the right tools." He gestured at the open binder on the table. "But you didn't leave." Lorraine measured the distance between herself and the door. He was blocking it completely. "Take the paintings," she said. "Take all of it. I won't say a word to anyone. I just want to go home." Craig's expression didn't shift. The paintings are complicated. The Thompson alone has had an active RCMP arts and culture file open for 35 years. Moving it would require infrastructure I don't currently have. He nodded toward the ring binders. The ledgers, though. My father documented everything. Every payment, every favor, every piece of leverage he ever accumulated. There are men in this province right now, men with offices and titles and people who open doors for them, who would transfer significant sums to ensure those pages never see the inside of a courtroom. He looked at her steadily, but that only works if there are no complications. The word settled in the cold air of the room like something dropped through ice. Lorraine understood with perfect clarity what she was. She looked at Craig's eyes and saw in them exactly what she had seen at the auction. Not cruelty, precisely, but a complete and functional indifference to her as a person. She was a complication. He was a man who resolved complications. She thought about Frank. Frank, who had spent 3 years in the Canadian Forces before his knees gave out, who had kept his kit methodical and his pockets organized, who had carried the same penknife in the breast pocket of his shirt every single day of his adult life. Not a Swiss Army knife, a simple 2-blade Barlow knife with a bone handle, worn smooth by 40 years of daily use. Lorraine had taken it from the tray of personal effects the hospital returned to her in a Ziploc bag, tucked it into the pocket of her work coat, the morning of the funeral, without thinking about it, the way you put on a ring, without thinking about it. Her fingers found it now. "Step away from the table," Craig said. "No," Lorraine said. She pulled the knife from her pocket, opened the longer blade with her thumbnail. Frank had shown her exactly how to do it years ago, pressing the nail into the groove just so, and held the blade near the open edge of the leather portfolio on the table. Craig almost smiled, a penknife. "Old leather," Lorraine said. "Very dry. I've been in a building tonight where the wallpaper peels off in sheets." She touched the blade to the corner of the portfolio. Inside were loose pages covered in precise handwriting, each one representing something someone, somewhere, would spend a great deal of money to keep sealed away. These binders have been sitting in a sealed room for 30 years. Paper gets brittle. She held the blade a centimeter closer. "How long do you think it takes a single page to catch from a spark?" "Half a minute. Less." Craig's entire posture changed. The controlled authority dropped away to reveal something raw and unsteady underneath. "Put that down." "Drop the gun." "You don't understand what you're threatening. Those records, the people documented in there. If you destroy them—" "If I destroy them, you have nothing to sell," Lorraine said. Her voice was very steady, which surprised even her. She suspected she was running on something beyond adrenaline, something closer to the specific calm that settles in when a person has already absorbed the worst thing, and there is simply nothing left to lose. No leverage, no payout, nothing. And you will have killed a 62-year-old retired school secretary in a concrete room under a condemned hotel in Espanola, Ontario, in January. And whatever else you are, Craig, I don't think you're stupid enough to believe that ends quietly. The gun lowered 3 inches, his jaw worked. "I will burn every page in this room before I let you walk me out of here," Lorraine said. "Your father spent 30 years building this archive. I will destroy it in 5 minutes. Or you put the gun on the floor, step back into that corridor, and walk out of this building and get in your car and drive away. And I will decide in the morning what to do." It was not a perfect plan. She was not certain she could start a fire with a penknife. She was not certain he would believe her. She was 62 years old with a bad back and a line of credit she'd maxed out on a building she'd owned for 6 hours. But Craig Mercer did not know any of that. He knew only what she had shown him, a woman standing in a cold concrete room, holding a blade near 30 years of his inheritance, with the face of someone who had already done her accounting and found nothing worth protecting more than her own terms. The gun touched the floor. He slid it to the wall with his foot. "Step into the corridor," Lorraine said. He stepped back, one step too. Lorraine gathered the 3 ring binders and the leather portfolio against her chest. She moved toward the door, keeping the wooden table between them for as long as she could. When she reached the passage, she turned sideways and moved through quickly, pulling the fire door shut behind her. The deadbolt was on her side of the door. She turned it. Then she stood in the narrow passage with 4 binders full of 30-year-old records pressed to her chest, listening to Craig Mercer's fists on 3 inches of reinforced steel, and she walked back through the hidden panel into the manager's office, sat down in the leather chair in the corner, and waited for morning. By 7:30 the next day, the storm had passed and Shore Road had been plowed. Lorraine drove to the gas station in Espanola that opened earliest, borrowed the landline from a teenager behind the counter, who looked at her dust-covered coat with wide eyes, and called the RCMP detachment in Sudbury. Staff Sergeant Ann Whitfield arrived on Shore Road with 2 constables and, 2 hours later, a federal liaison officer from the RCMP's Arts and Cultural Property Crime Unit in Ottawa. By noon, the parking lot of the Lakeview Arms held 4 cruisers, a forensic unit van, and a panel truck from a private conservation firm. Craig Mercer was extracted from the room behind the fire door. He did not resist. He sat on the hood of a cruiser with a blanket around his shoulders and looked at the frozen lake with the expression of a man doing very precise arithmetic in his head. Staff Sergeant Whitfield sat with Lorraine in the front seat of her cruiser and took the statement carefully, without hurrying. When they were finished, she handed Lorraine a card. "The ledgers recovered in that room are going to take considerable time to work through," she said. "Our initial assessment is that they document transactions involving a number of individuals who currently hold, or recently held, public office. This is a federal matter now. The RCMP and the Crown will want to speak with you further." She paused. "The cash found in a secondary compartment behind the paintings, approximately $300,000 in bundled currency, has been seized as evidence. That money is not yours, and it won't be returned. I want to be straightforward with you about that." Lorraine nodded. She hadn't even known about a second compartment. "The Thompson panel and the other 6 works," Anne continued, "belong to the estate of the original collector, whose family has maintained a recovery fund through Lloyd's of London since 1989. There is a finder's reward attached to verified recovery. A representative is on his way from Ottawa." A man in a dark parka crossed the parking lot toward the cruiser 20 minutes later. He introduced himself as Kenneth Fisk, legal representative for the beneficiary trust of the collection's original owner. He was careful and methodical in the way of people who manage inherited responsibility for a living. "The finder's reward is structured as a percentage of the insured value at the time of recovery, adjusted for documented appreciation," Kenneth said. "The Thompson panel alone carries a current independent valuation of approximately $4.8 million. The finder's percentage is 12.5%. The other 6 pieces are being authenticated now. Conservatively, Mrs. Beaumont, the total disbursement to you will be in the range of $800,000. Under the cultural property provisions, it is entirely tax-free." Lorraine looked at him for a long moment. "I need to call my bank," she said. Kenneth blinked. "Of course. Can I borrow your phone? Mine died around 3 this morning." 6 weeks later, Lorraine Beaumont stood on the front step of her house in Chelmsford. The bank's notice of mortgage arrears was gone from the doorframe. In its place, on the same nail, she had tacked the stamped letter marked account, paid in full and closed. The rose bushes Frank had planted along the foundation were buried under a clean foot of February snow. In the spring they would come back without any help from her, the way they always did. She held his penknife in her palm for a moment, turning it in the pale winter light. The bone handle was warm from her pocket. She ran her thumb along the worn edge of it, a small, deliberate motion, and then put it back where it belonged. He'd been right, as he usually was. The worst thing that could happen was nothing. "What would you have done?" standing in that room with a penknife and no way out? Drop it in the comments. We read everyone. If Lorraine's story earned it, hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to claim the drama, because next week's story is even harder to believe, and every word of it is worth your time.